Okay, my name is Carol Witham, and as Letitia mentioned, I've been studying vernal pools for a very, very long time. And tonight I sort of want to give you a grand tour of sort of the ecology and distribution of vernal pools. Okay, so I'm going to take you on a grand tour of the vernal pools in California. I'm not going to focus on any particular area. I'm going to sort of bounce all around the state and tell you some things about vernal pools. So um, this is a vernal pool. This one happens to be in Phoenix Park in Sacramento County. It's in a blue oak woodland, which is somewhat unusual, but it's a very, very pretty place that's open to the public. So I'm going to go through some various aspects of a vernal pool tonight. One of the things I want to talk about a little bit is the physical attributes. What conditions give rise to vernal pools, where they're found, and approximately how many are left. So let's start with a simple definition of a vernal pool. It's a depression, usually in grassland, can be in other habitats. Two of the most important factors are that it has an impermeable layer beneath the soil surface in a very shallow depth. And that impermeable layer prevents rainwater from percolating downward into the subsoils. And so the water perches in the vernal pools. The other very important aspect of vernal pools is they occur only in Mediterranean climates. And that would be a place where there is a wet, mild winter when they pond, and then a very, very dry, hot summer where they're completely dry. So vernal pools go through an aquatic phase, a flowering phase, and a dormant phase. And the dormant phase tends to be most of the summer. Looking at on ground level, the vernal pools, let's see if this works. No. Okay, looking at ground level, they look sort of individual, but this aerial photograph actually shows that vernal pools can be fairly complex systems on the landscape. This is in southeast Sacramento County, I believe. So an important factor of vernal pools, as I mentioned before, is this impermeable layer. I'm going to see if I could show this here. Nope, it's not going to work. So there's an impermeable. Okay, it doesn't like me. There is an impermeable layer down in the subsoils or just above the subsoils. And so the rainwater comes down and it perches on top of this impervious layer. And in places where you have depressions, you get vernal pools. But as you can see, the water actually is fairly continuous across the landscape, even in what areas that you would typically call an upland. And this is a buffer so that when there's excess water in the pools, that flows toward the uplands. And when the pools are drying down, water from the uplands tends to flow toward the vernal pools. And so you get a buffering effect. This is a stream cut in eastern Sacramento County. And the hard pan starts right about here. And in this part of Sacramento County, the hard pan is actually many, many meters thick. So this stream is not actually breaching the hard pan, it's just eroding through the top of the hard pan. But the hard pan consists of cobbles and cemented silica and iron, so glass and iron deposits all cement together to form the hard pan. And so this is pretty typical of some locations. I'll mention some other types of hard pans that you get in vernal pools as we move along. So vernal pools occur in three fairly general geomorphic locations in California. One is what I would consider to be high terrace vernal pools, and these are on the alluvium of the ancient Sierra Nevada. So these occur on the eastern side of the Sacramento Valley, on the rolling hills that are mostly cattle grazing land right now. And these are the most abundant vernal pools remaining in California, primarily because they're on private cattle ranches. And they also tend to be the most diverse of the vernal pools in California because there's so many different soil types they occur on this alluvial terrace. So this is somewhere near Matherfield in Sacramento County. This is again somewhere near Matherfield in Sacramento County, another high terrace vernal pool. These are very, very old. Most of these pools are in excess of 200,000 years old. I will show you a slide at the end of the slideshow of a surface that's 4 million years old that occurs down in Merced County. So these are the high terrace vernal pools. Another geomorphic surface you may find vernal pools on is extremely young. Can everyone see the cinder cone in the background? This is volcanic mud flow from the ancient Mount Tama, which is now, the remnants of which are now Mount Lassen. And so the impermeable layer here is actually the mud flow. In some places, it's basalt. These landscapes tend to be relatively young. Almost all of these are less than 40,000 years old. Here, you can get vast areas where the only uplands you have are the mounds, and everything else supersaturates or ponds, and that excludes the non-native vegetation, and you get these wonderful fields of flowers. So this is Inks Creek in Tehama County. This is another shot in Tehama County. This is on the edge of Hoggs Lake, and you can see Mount Lassen in the background. So these are very, very young vernal pool landscapes. The third geomorphic surface that you can find vernal pools on is intermediary in age from between the ancient alluvial terrace pools and the younger volcanic pools. These are what is commonly called the basin rim formation. And this is just literally right above the 100-year floodplain of the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers. This is a very unusual vernal pool complex in California because the impermeable layer here is actually clay. There's no hard pan, there's no volcanics. It's just massive clay beneath the soil surface that causes the ponding. Because of the amount of clay, these pools tend to be alkaline. And so they have a completely different suite of species that you will get on the high terrace pools or the volcanic vernal pools. This shot is somewhere near Jepson Prairie in Solano County. And another basin rim formation pool full of down India. This happens to be in southern Yolo County at the Tule Ranch. So this map shows the extent of vernal pool grasslands, not individual vernal pools, but rather landscapes that contain vernal pools as of 2012. And I have remapped since then, but my GIS skills are minimal and I don't remember how I made this map. So I haven't reproduced it. And I'm about to remap one more time. So maybe the next time I give this talk, you guys will see a more recent map. But I want to show you that up the east side of the valley here, up to about there, those are all the high terrace vernal pools. For reference, this is UC Merced, Mather Fields right in there. And then you get volcanic vernal pools up in here from the Sutter Buttes north. Those tend to be volcanic vernal pools. And then the basin rim vernal pools are down in the Judson Prairie area, and then like down in the Kesterson, St. Louis Wildlife Refuge, and then all the way down into like Thermalito Ridge and stuff in the southern San Joaquin Valley. Most of the basin rim formation pools have been converted to agriculture very, very long time ago. So this is a really old aerial photograph of Independence and Mather, which is just outside of town here. And the really dark spots you can see here are vernal pools. And I called this up because I wanted to talk a little bit about an EPA report that came out maybe a decade ago that said that at least 25% or less than 25% of the vernal pools that once existed in California remain. A lot of us who've been doing mapping and studying these think it's less than 10% actually. But the important thing that came out of that EPA report was, even though there's quite a bit of landscape that remains, it's highly disturbed by human activities. So here you have, in the center, you have this housing development. In the lower left, you have mining. In the upper left, you have runways. You have golf courses on the far right. And so you can see how disturbed the landscape is. And that's even more apparent when you see this oblique aerial photograph of the Mather Field area. You can see all of the beautiful vernal pools out there, and you can see that there's a sewage line, some other kind of underground utility, golf courses, houses, the whole bit. So going back to the distribution map, because I don't want this to end on a bad note. During the course of doing this 2012 distribution mapping, for the first time ever, the California Conservation Easement Database became available publicly. And so we were able to intercept the vernal pool polygons with conservation easements and other protected lands in California. And so the total green area that was available there is a little over 750,000 acres. The purple represents stuff that's protected, and that is about 230,000 acres, or almost a third of the vernal pool landscape is currently protected. And I'm hoping the next time I map, that number is going to go up some. Not all of these places are being managed for vernal pool habitat. This is the St. Louis Kesterson wildlife area. Those refuges are being managed for ducks, not for vernal pools. So, but at least they're being protected from development. So now I want to talk a little bit about the biological attributes of vernal pools, why they're unique, whether or not they're all the same, and if there are any really extra special ones out there. So the only way I really know how to do this talk without going way off on tangents is to sort of walk us through a year. So this is like July, maybe August. In the foreground, before you see the woodland in the background, that's a vernal pool landscape. It's dead and dry and brown. Sometimes you see cows on it, but it's still dead and dry and brown. It's very, very underwhelming landscape, often for as many as 9 months out of the year. Even when you get down into the bottom of the vernal pool in the summertime, it's a pretty underwhelming landscape. This happens to be in eastern Sacramento County. So then you get into the fall and it starts to rain, and enough rain occurs so that the perched water table begins to develop, and you start to see puddles on the landscape. And as soon as you start to see puddles on the landscape, You see visitors to those puddles. This happens to be waterfowl at Judson Prairie Preserve, a human somewhere in eastern Sacramento County, and the Sacramento Splash students at Mather Field in Sacramento County. And so what are all the visitors there for? Well, one of the things you might encounter in the vernal pool is this egg mass of a Pacific coarse frog. Pacific coarse frogs aren't endemic to vernal pools. Because the vernal pools dry completely in the summertime, they do not support major predators such as fish. So the tadpoles of the Pacific coarse frog do extremely well in vernal pool landscapes, and also in this part of Sacramento County. I think they breed here in camellia blossoms, but I'm not sure. So anyway, so Pacific coarse frogs are common, but they occur in vernal pools. And here we have a microscopic, and it's the only microscopic slide I'm going to show you. This happens to be a newly hatched water flea surrounded by a bunch of diatoms. And the reason I'm showing this slide is to sort of remind everyone that the aquatic food chain is very complex, and it begins with microscopic organisms. So that's the bottom of the food chain, and now we're going to go up the food chain a little bit. Here we have a California clam shrimp. It can get to be about the size of a dime. It has 14 pair of legs and antennas, and it goes, when it's swimming around, really, truly, it goes, and then it gets tired and it lays down on the bottom of the vernal pool and filter feeds just like a bivalve. And in fact, its shell has what looks to be age rings on it, like you would get on a bivalve, but this is actually a shrimp. Other critters you might encounter would be a water boatman being eaten by a Hydrochera beetle larva. There aren't any large predators in vernal pools, but it's still an eat or be eaten world. I once gave a talk to a bunch of legislative staff out at Mather Field, and I had an assistant dip netting for me to show them the organisms. And I went, oh, gee, what's that green thing? And I stuck my finger into the net. That beetle larva has got mandibles that are like hypodermic needles. And when they eat their prey, what they do is they latch onto their prey and they secrete digestive enzymes into their prey and then suck out bug soup. And so anyway, that day I had one dangling from my finger. It was pretty amazing. And here we have some other organisms that you will commonly find in vernal pools. I'm going to talk about the little orange jobbers first. And that's a technical term, by the way. Copepods, the little orange jobbers, are found in nearly every freshwater and saltwater habitat in the world. There are over 13,000 species. 2,800 of them live in freshwater. There are actually 10 different orders. Some of them have one eye, some of them have 5 eyes, some of them have one ovisac, some of them have 3. It's just an amazing group of organisms. And they're, like I said, they're mostly saltwater. But the most controversial organism in this slide is this one right here. That is a fairy shrimp. And when you talk to a farmer or a rancher, they'll tell you they're everywhere. And most of the time, yeah, there are a lot of them out there, and you'll find them in a lot of different vernal pool type habitats. Unfortunately for the ranchers and the developers, 5 of them are listed under the Endangered Species Act. And so there is a reason to conserve vernal pools for these organisms. So this is a female California fairy shrimp, or Lindariella californica. You can tell she's a Lindariella because she has red eyes and red tails. You can tell she's a female because she's got this great brood sac right here full of cysts. The cyst looks something like this. And they have a very, very unique reproductive strategy. And the reason we call them cysts instead of eggs is because that's actually, before the shell goes on the outside, that's actually a 4,000 cell organism. It's undifferentiated organism at the time, but it's 4,000 cells. And the advantage to doing that before the shell is put on is the moment the conditions are right, the nauplii can hatch out and begin feeding immediately and growing and reaching maturity. And I want to compare a cyst to a chicken egg. Chicken egg, when it starts out, is one cell. And that requires 3 weeks minimum of nurturing before a free living organism can hatch out and begin to fend for itself. The fairy shrimp can do it in a matter of hours. And in fact, some fairy shrimp will go from still being in the cyst to reproductively mature adult in 4 days. Some of them take weeks and weeks, but some of them can do it in 4 days. So this is a photograph of a dry tray that some students were growing some vernal pools in. And you see these little deflated looking things? Those are the cysts. And they're waiting to become rehydrated and for the conditions to be just right before the fairy shrimp can hatch out again. So I'm going to show you a few of the fairy shrimp because I think they're gorgeous. This is a vernal pool fairy shrimp, Brachynephta lynchi. It's a male. You can tell he's a male because he's got these great big long walrusy looking claspers. And he doesn't have an ovisac. In fact, he's got 2 peni. A male conservancy fairy shrimp. Look at how beefy his claspers are. The longhorn fairy shrimp, there's males and females in here. Look at how different her egg sac looks. And look at how long his antennae are. And the riverside fairy shrimp, Streptocephalus wooteni. And again, red tails. And you think, why would they have red tails with all those waterfowl coming by? Wouldn't that just put a target on their back? Well, it just so happens that Streptocephalus wooteni swims in water that's about the color and consistency of a latte. So they're well hidden in the suspended clay in the water there. And then my favorite vernal pool one of my favorite vernal pool organisms is the tadpole shrimp or Lepidurus packardi. These have been around about 200 million years. They have not evolved at all since the early Jurassic. If they look a lot like horseshoe crabs, they do. Convergent evolution, because they're not related to crabs, they're a shrimp. But I want to go back to why was everybody visiting the vernal pools when there were standing water in them? It's a really large piece of protein. The Lepidurus would be a little crunchy in my opinion. Plus it is an endangered species, and so you really don't want to eat endangered species. But there's very clear evidence, particularly down in Merced County, that Native Americans harvested fairy shrimp for protein. And if you think about it, if you can take your winnowing basket and scoop up, a half a cup of shrimp and make shrimp paste out of it, that's a lot less work than having to process acorns for your food. So the Native Americans did harvest seeds from the grasslands and the vernal pools and also fairy shrimp. And then a talk about vernal pools in this area would be incomplete without a brief discussion of the California tiger salamander. And this is Molly. Molly is the fattest California tiger salamander I've ever seen because the fifth graders get to feed Molly at Sacramento Splash. She's very mature adult. They can live up to be about 17 years old. They spend 90% of their life in underground burrows. They coexist with Boda's pocket gophers and California ground squirrels, and they eat worms and bugs and stuff like that. And on a rainy night, if they're in the mood, they will start trekking back to their natal pond to breed. And this is a larva of a California tiger salamander. This one is actually fairly far along. You can see it has legs, and its long feathery gills are being reabsorbed in its body. These are really dumb animals, particularly in their aquatic phase. They cannot persist in areas that have fish because the fish just eat the larva right and left. And so on top of that, they require anywhere between 90 and 110 days from egg being laid until the metamorph can leave the vernal pool and fend for itself. And so California tiger salamanders are nowadays in California, in this part of California, limited to extremely large vernal pools, ones that pond long enough, but that have no connection to permanent water so that there are no fish. It's also listed as threatened or endangered, depending on which area you're in and whether you're talking about the state or the Federal Endangered Species Act. Okay, so most rain has happened and you're only getting an occasional spring shower, and the pools begin to dry up. And as they do, each different soil type on each different surface, depending on how much water it had and how long the water stayed, you get these amazing expressions of vernal pools. This is somewhere in Solano County. This is also probably somewhere in Solano County. This might be the Campbell Ranch. This is somewhere in eastern Sacramento County, probably somewhere near Mather, given I can see it, the tower in the background. And so each of these vernal pools just, it looks different. As we teach the students in the Sacramento Splash fifth grade program, vernal pools are like snowflakes. No two are exactly alike. This is a really, really beautiful, very large playa pool in eastern Merced County. And the campus was originally scheduled to go right up there, and it's not there. Okay, so moving on to the flowering phase. I want to talk a little bit about the plants that occur in vernal pools. And I'm going to start out by saying that I participated in a research project with Michael Barber and a bunch of other folks out of UC Davis, in which we visited vernal pool landscapes from the Mexico border to the Oregon border, and yeah, everywhere. And we recorded over 200 plant species in the vernal pool data we collected. Half of those plants are entirely restricted to vernal pools. Some of those plants are very, very common to all vernal pools and all vernal pool regions. But there's a large proportion of the plants that are either locally or globally rare. And for perspective, there are a few other places in the world that have vernal pools. The most notable, in my opinion, would be the Central Valley of Chile. And they do have vernal pools in the Central Valley of Chile. Their entire vernal pool flora is 16 species. So that gives you an idea of how extremely special the vernal pools of California are. Back east, they have things they call vernal pools as well. They form a little bit differently. They have no endemic flora whatsoever. They are home to fairy shrimp and amphibian larvae. And so they're very, very important. And in fact, in Maine, citizen scientists can go out to a vernal pool, collect some data, record pictures of certain species, get it certified as a vernal pool, and it's protected. That doesn't occur in California. Okay, so anyway, let's talk about plants for a few, because this is the Plant Society. But you know, I have to talk about the animals when I talk to the Plant Society. And when I talk to the Wildlife Society, I have to talk about the plants. So, you know, it's you little cross-pollination going on here. So this is actually sort of on the edges of the vernal pools, a little bit in uplands. And it brings to mind that in 1869, when John Muir made his second trip to Yosemite, instead of taking a coach across from the Bay Area to Yosemite, he walked across the Central Valley of California. And in his field notebook, and I'm paraphrasing this slightly, but in his field notebook, he wrote, "Sauntering in any direction, my feet would brush about 100 flowers with every step, as if wading in liquid gold." And he was talking about the gold fields and the tidy tips and the Johnny Tuck that's in this picture. Another plant that occurs sort of on the margins of the vernal, between the vernal pools and the uplands, is this meadow fern. This happens to be Limnanthes douglasii variety rosea. The interesting thing about meadow foams is they produce 5 very waxy nutlets per flower. And those waxy nutlets contain a very, very long carbon, unbranched carbon chain of oils. And there are some folks up in Oregon that are test growing Limnanthes to see if those oils can be produced in large enough quantities to replace sperm whale oil for machinery lubrication. So there is at least one vernal pool plant that might save the whales. This is a different gold field. This one happens to be vernal pool gold fields, Lasthenia fremontii. And there's some little downingia, blue downingias tucked into the bottom. I'll get to the downingias eventually. This happens to be the most common of the Lasthenian vernal pools, but this is one of those vernal pool endemic genera. There are about 9 species. All of them are endemic to vernal pools. Some of them are very, very rare. Xylocarpus brevissimus, who has the best name, common name, all of the vernal pool plants. Its common name is woolly marbles. Plagiobothries. These are always fun. You need flowers and nutlets and handlens and a lot of patience. There are about 16 species that occur in vernal pool landscape throughout California. This happens to be the most common one, called vernal pool popcorn flower. Sacramento beard style. Its genus name is Pogogyne, which is beard in the female parts of the plant. So beard style. This one, the flowers are only a couple of millimeters across. It's got 6 square stems like most mints do. And this one, if you rub it with your fingers and smell your fingers, it tastes like a combination of spearmint and chocolate. So this one smells very much like the Andes mint candies. A close relative, Douglas's beard style, you see how it's got those really awesome flowers on it. And this one you can tell from the other one because this one only smells like spearmint. There's no chocolate. Sometimes you have to know these things if it's not blooming yet, and you need to collect the data and move on, you know? So I always teach field biologists to use all of their senses, and that includes smell and taste. Naviridia leucocephala. Most people call this Naviridia. The only common name I can find besides that is nivitas, which is Spanish for little snow. And if you're going to say nivitas, you might as well say Naviridia, right? Field else clover. Vernal pool monkey flower. I think this is now Diplicus tricolor, but it could be Arianthry tricolor. I don't know. Does anybody know, Leslie? Diplicus? Okay. Anyway, really beautiful little plant. This is it gives you an idea of how small it is and how beautiful its architecture is with all those really gorgeous little glands on the hairs on the stem. And then there's an entire genus in the bellflower family that is entirely endemic to vernal pools. These are the Downingias, which is the genus name. They also can be called sky blues. This is Downingia concolor. I can't fringe Downingia because the upper petals have a fringe on the edge of them. Folded Downingia or Downingia ornatissima. The upper petals on this one sweep backward and curl around. Downingia cuspidata or tube Downingia. This one is a real pale one from somewhere up on the volcanics. If you go up on Table Mountain outside of Oroville, the entire population there is snow white with a little yellow, and there's no blue at all. Downingia bella, or is that Bella is pretty Downingia? I don't remember. Downingia bicornuta or horn Downingia. Downingia pulchella, flat-faced Downingia. Downingia insignis or cupped Downingia. And then one of my favorites, dwarf Downingia or Downingia pusilla. And that's only about 2 millimeters across. The most interesting thing about that happens to be a blue one with fairly wide petals. There is a white morph that has really, really narrow petals. And some people have thought it's 2 species, and some people think it's only 1 species. Problem with all of that is there are very, very few people who do enough field research to be able to tell this apart. And if anyone knows anything about how plant taxonomy is done, you take a whole bunch of these and you squash them, and then you dry them out, and then you glue them to a piece of cardboard, and then you put them in a cabinet, and sometimes they molder there for 50 years. And then you get them out and you look at them under a microscope or whatever, and you can't tell the 2 different ones apart then. So this is still one of those mysteries that I may decide to solve in my retirement. Who knows? So this is a rabbit's eye view of what a vernal pool in full bloom looks like. And so you've just got these lots and lots and lots of flowers all blooming at the same time. These plants are also all really common to what I would consider to be relatively small vernal pools. And by small vernal pools, we're talking bathtub size to maybe a few times the size of this room. There's another kind of vernal pool in California, though, that's really important. And they're commonly called playa pools, playa being beach in Spanish. And this big thing in the center is a playa pool. And if you can see around the edges, there's all these little light colored areas. Those are all vernal pools. This is in a low spot landscape. And so as the pools slope, fill with water and the overflow goes downstream into this playa pool, it carries with it all of the suspended solids in the water and everything else. So the playa pool, besides ponding for a lot longer, has completely different soil chemistry because the soils from upslope have washed down into this playa pool. And so they tend to have a lot more clay, which has a lot better water holding capacity even when they're dry. And so these pools can sometimes pond for 6 to 8 months. And then they dry out very, very slowly. And they have a completely different flora than the vernal pools I was just showing you. One of the plants you might find in one of these playa pools is Calusa grass. That is a grass. That picture was taken in August. It's blooming on a dry playa pool. This happens to be out at Jepson Prairie Preserve. And this is an entire tribe in the grass family that is completely endemic to vernal pools. And I've been monitoring this grass at Jepson Prairie now for about 37 years. And it's always a volunteer only sort of project. And you're not an official Neostophia monitoring person until you've actually pinched one of these and licked your fingers. They produce an exudate that is a dead ringer for a cross between battery acid and tobacco juice. The sort of anecdotal idea of why that happens is that these bloom in the dead of summer. And anyone who's ever gardened knows a grasshopper will eat anything green, right? Including pin flags and survey tape and signs and things like that. Well, the exudate these grasses produce probably detour the grasshopper herbivory. So this again is Calusa grass. This one happens to be Sacramento orchid grass. It is entirely endemic to Sacramento County. The center of the universe for this is right outside the Kiefer landfill out on Grant Line Road in Sacramento County. This one tastes like a combination of ascorbic acid and tobacco juice. So the tobacco juice thing is common to all of these. Each one of them produces a slightly different acid in their exudate, and you can often tell them apart by smell or taste. And then finally, the rarest of this grass tribe, which is Solano grass or Tuctorium mucronata. And you know what? I don't taste this one because it's that rare. So I can't tell you what this one tastes like. So this slide is up not because I'm going to talk about laws, but because I want to talk about how the laws apply to vernal pool landscapes. Most of the laws that might protect or regulate the destruction of vernal pools only consider the wetted part of the vernal pool. So in this shot of Jepson Prairie, this landscape mid slide that you can see the yellow and the white in, that's the vernal pool. That part would be protected. All of this stuff up here is not. And in fact, in a lot of environmental documents, people will call this non-native annual grassland and say it has absolutely no value at all. At Jepson Prairie, you have a really nice remnant stand of purple needlegrass and Johnny Jump Up violets and things like that. But these grasslands are a refugia, even though they're dominated by non-native annual grasses that came from somewhere else. They're a refugia for native plants that cannot grow in parking lots. So Thyanocarpus radicans or spoke pods, Lupinus bicolor or miniature lupin. Nereida pubescens. I can't think of a common name. I'm sorry. That's a grassland species. Blowwives, Akira kinemalis. That happens to be the seeds you're looking, the seed parasols you're looking at, and not the flower. California golden violets or Viola pedunculata. This will rival any pansy you can buy in any nursery. It's a beautiful plant. Narrow-leaved mule's ears, Wyethia angustifolia. Diclostema multiflorum. I can't think of a common name either for this. This is a diclostema. Brodea coronaria or crown brodea. And then late in the season, you start to get things like calocorduses or Calocordus luteus. Thank you. Yellow Mariposa tulip. Yeah. So that's some of the upland species that you might find around the vernal pools. And so I want to just close out with a few little vignettes here. This is a vernal pool in Grassland State Park in central Merced County. It's a large playa pool. It's protected. It's open to the public. You can go there and visit. This happened to be in spring. I had a field crew out and we were collecting vegetation data. And so when we got back at the end of the day, we knew how big this pool was. We knew what the cover of this purple flower was within the pool. And this is only a portion of the pool, you can see. But we knew the cover of that plant. And we know that each of the individual flowers there was about the size of a nickel. And sitting down with a couple of beers and a napkin and a calculator and a bunch of discussion, we determined that there was 25 million blossoms of Downingia pulchella in this pool. So this is Eastern Merced County. This would have been almost the view from the chancellor's house if they'd gotten to build the campus where they wanted to the first time. But you cannot see the campus from here, and that is a good thing. And so then finally, I mentioned earlier, there's a landform in Merced County called the China Hat Formation. And this surface is 4 million years old. It's known as the oldest continuously exposed soil surface in North America. The coolest thing about this, you can see all the mounds. You can see the pools in between the mounds. I don't know if you can see, if that's in focus enough that you can see that those pools are chock full of rocks. There's no rocks in the mounds. There's no, if you dig down below the rocks in the vernal pools, there's no rocks in the subsoils. Those rocks are left over from whatever surface was above that eroded away. And so I think that from a geologist's perspective, that's a very, very interesting location. So anyway, that is my tour of vernal pools for you guys tonight. Thank you.
Let me just point out, when we talk about monarchs left maybe, you mentioned once monarchs left their local vineyard sites over along the coast, they headed inland. if you just think about that one picture that Carol showed, the billions of flowers, that's what they would have been able to nectar on back then. And that would have given them the strength to last, get to the places where the milkweed was going to be sprouted. So the monarchs that are leaving this month are not going to find any sprouted milkweed unless they run into the tropical milkweed, which is a big old thing. All of the native milkweed are still underground. They need that nectar. That's what's going to allow them to survive along with them by milkweed degrading. So that's what California looked like before it turned into what we see.
That's sense.
Okay, I'm going to take any questions. I'm looking, are there any questions online? I don't see any. Any questions in the room? Yes.
You said that the locust was during the late season. Were they one of the few that in the late season?
There's actually quite a few geophytes that bloom in the late season. Mariposa tulips would be one of them. Some of the rhodeas bloom really late in the season. And then there's a lot of tarweeds and things like that that also bloom in the late season that are nectar sources as well as things like that. So a lot of those are beetle pollinated because the beetle can stand the heat more than a lot of the softer bodied insects. How can you tell the age of a vernal pool? Okay, so that actually requires doing some little bit of geology research. I'm not saying that any particular vernal pool is that old, but that the landscape the vernal pool occurs on is in that age range. So that has to do with when those landforms were created. The 4 million-year-old place is called the China Hat Formation, and it is in eastern Merced County. And if you Google China Hat Mountain, Merced County, California, you will get right to that area. And if you do it on Google Earth, you can actually see images very similar to the one I showed. Okay. Yes.
Well, I heard the prairie pothole in the Midwest.
Yeah, how we should.
Okay, prairie potholes usually occur in the sandstone formations, and they are home to fairy shrimp and tadpole shrimp. They don't have any flowers. And so there are a lot of sort of these ephemeral wetlands throughout the world that support fairy shrimp. And in fact, there's a lot of desert fairy shrimp that only hatch out in the real warm weather. But they don't have the same sort of flora that everyone thinks of California vernal pools. Yes.
You were mentioning about like looking sand that is built, and we were see build this land where they built UC Merced, but is this mostly just the fairy shrimp that live there?
We moved that campus twice, and they wanted to place that campus on the high spot in the largest remaining intact vernal pool landscape in all of California. And if they built that on the high spot, the indirect effects downslope of where they wanted to build would have destroyed the entire landscape. So we moved it from that perch to slightly downhill from there, and some of us still didn't like it. And we negotiated, and we pushed them down farther down because they started the campus on a golf course. So they actually started building the campus before they had their permits. But we kept moving it. And after we negotiated a new line for the campus. I went out there one day with one of UC Merced's consultants and a couple of attorneys and stuff. And I walked right up to the line and I said, "This is the line, right?" And they all said yes. And I went, "Yes, we did the right thing." So yes, they did take out some vernal pools, none of the best. And everything downslope. So the impact was much, much less than they had planned it to be. Well, that was 20 years ago. I go down and teach down there now. Okay. Thank you all very much.